Welcome back, I'm Bela. On the 4th of March, delegates at the United Nations drafted the world's first ever deal to protect areas of the ocean that fall out of countries' national boundaries.
Around 70% of the world's surface is covered by ocean water. 2/3 of this is considered the high seas, which are international waters where all countries have the right to fish, ship and do research. Only 1% of the high seas are protected, but this could change soon. A United Nations Pact, which has taken almost 2 decades to draft, aims to ensure the conservation of the world's oceans as well as sustainable use of its marine biological diversity.
Treaty origins can be traced back across a decade and a half of negotiations. But if we start thinking about where that initial seed was planted, it's possibly in 1992. And so that's when the United Nations held what is widely known as the Earth Summit. And so the Convention on Biological Diversity was adapted at this summit to address biodiversity conservation and sustainable use within national jurisdictions, but it did not include beyond national jurisdictions. And so it's taken until the 4th of March for us to actually get what is a draft treaty for biodiversity conservation beyond national jurisdictions, so in the high seas.
But why has it taken so long to come into draft form? There are many elements to the treaty which has taken time to build upon. Balancing biodiversity conservation and sustainability can be a challenge, but adding the sharing of natural resources between countries can complicate this further. Different countries have different legal systems that need to be taken into account in order to reach an agreement.
Currently, the treaty will only come into effect once at least 60 countries have signed up and passed their legislation in their own countries. If the United Kingdom signs up to the Pact, the Falklands will be given the option to partake, but Falkland Islands government will not be forced to engage if the Pact contradicts its own priorities.
Obviously, UK, we expect, probably will sign. And as an overseas territory, along with our other overseas territories our friends, we will most likely be invited to have the treaty extended to us, which is the normal process that happens when UKG signs up to these UN conventions or treaties. So that's the kind of process that we expect to follow. And at that point, we will review very carefully the implications for the Falkland Islands and the fishery, not just the fishery, but the Falklands in general and the environment, because obviously we use our natural resources for our economy. So it's really important that we weigh up what the implications are of the treaty. That said, the overarching objectives of the treaty are fantastic. We suffer in that many of our fish stocks, and particularly the Ilex squid fishery, is a straddling stock that obviously doesn't know about political boundaries, and its life cycle is over the continental shelf, and it is a significant area of unregulated high seas, which this treaty would help in terms of how we can regulate the fisheries.
Fishing is one of the most important industries in the Falklands, making up around 40% of its GDP, and significant work has gone into protecting and managing fishing in the Falklands waters. Currently, work is ongoing to look into establishing marine managed areas around the islands. Treaties like this from the UN help go beyond individual government remits to also protect international waters.
But from the fishing sector's perspective, we obviously fish on the high seas. Some of our member companies do. We have vessels that fish particularly to the north of the islands, outside of our exclusive economic zone. So we have an interest from that perspective. And also a number of the stocks that we fish actually come from the high seas, mainly to the north and a bit to the west of us as well. So we have an interest in seeing those stocks properly managed and protected. So my hope is that this might be the first step in seeing a little bit more kind of global or coordination in the area about the management of fish stocks that we all have an interest in.
So if you took, for example, the Ilex fishery, which it's an omostraphid squid, which means it lives in the deep water in the ocean. It doesn't use the coastal areas for its breeding cycle. It literally uses the continental shelf and the shelf slope for its entire breeding cycle. At the moment, that stock spans from southern Brazil through the Argentine EEZ, the Falkland Islands EEZ, and then off into the high seas waters. If there was an ability for this treaty to be able to coordinate some sort of stock management and protection, or in somehow set the harvest controls so that we can fish it jointly in a sustainable manner, then that will be good for everybody. That will be good for even those on the high seas, but also for the Argentines and also for ourselves. So that is an example of something that could be a really good benefit. At the moment, we're fishing blind because we don't have a regional fisheries management organisation across the Southwest Atlantic.
I think we all watch AIS, the system we use for seeing what ships are in the area, and it's incredible the number of vessels that you see fishing only a few hundred miles to the north of the Falkland Islands. Suggested, I think, in Fisheries Committee that it's somewhere between 400 and 500 mainly Chinese flagged vessels up there at the moment. That number of vessels and that amount of fishing effort feels just intuitively unsustainable. So hopefully the UN starting a process of greater regulation of the high seas, which would cover that kind of area potentially, can in the longer term, and we know it'll take a number of years, start to see that effort perhaps come down a bit and just be better controlled.
Many marine species migrate via the high seas to get to the Falklands. These areas of ocean are important for biodiversity and ecosystems, meaning that it is important to consider the potential human impacts within these oceanic regions.
So somewhere like the Falkland Islands, for example, we see a sort of mixing of fauna on the seafloor. So you can have the similar animals that live in the sub-Antarctic or Chile, for example, but also the South Atlantic fauna living here too. And you also have important connections between breeding populations, where animals feed and where they migrate to. And so all the impacts and barriers along the way need to be considered for marine life.
While this treaty is still in draft form, the commercial impacts on the islands are yet to be fully understood. But for the species that live in the Falklands water, the high seas are crucial to their continued survival, and the protection of these areas will have lasting impacts on these creatures.
If it's, and when it happens, touching the wood that it does happen, this will enable countries to band together to stop the stripping of the oceans of natural resources. There are some countries, and I won't name any of those countries, who seem to think that they can do whatever they like on the high seas, and for the sake of the planet in the future, that's got to be stopped. This assembly and the ones that will follow, I have no doubt, will play their full part in protecting the resources around the islands.
At a high level, it looks like it can only be a good thing for us, because obviously we want to see those stocks that we rely on for our economy to be protected and to be fished sustainably. So let's see what it looks like when the detail is all worked through.
I mean, this is our kind of traction point in history, right? Where we either, we've got these projections now and we can go down the pathway of trying to do something very productive and positive about it. And it has taken a particularly long time for the ocean to become a part of that conversation. I think last year when I talked to you a little bit about the reflections on COP27, the Ocean and Climate Nexus has been included in that, and we're hopefully have some sort of agenda item and strong foundation building from that inclusion. And equally, this draft agreement gives us the foundation for that. And none of us can predict the future, right, in that regard, but you see it's 198 member states that have committed to this and finally come to an agreement. And so there's a lot of hope attached to that this will be a meaningful turning point in human history.
That's it for Falklands in Focus for this week. Don't forget you can watch FITV via the KTV broadcasting system, or thanks to Fortuna, for free online on our website fitv.co.fk. We'll see you next Friday at 7. Goodbye.